This module discusses how best to use one of the powerful new features within Magento 2, plugins. This module discusses how best to use plugins together with DI change the developer experience. The purpose is to make customizing Magento simpler and to decrease the probability of conflicts between extensions. Plugins are used to extend, change, the behavior of any native public method within a Magento class. Native methods refer to those Magento class methods included with a native installation. The behavior of native methods can be changed by creating an extension. Extensions use plugin classes to change the behavior of the target methods. Plugins change the behavior of the original class, but not the class itself. You cannot use plugins for final methods, final classes, private methods, or classes created without dependency injection. To ensure that plugins work correctly, you must follow declaration and naming rules. Note: plugins allow you to modify a single method, while a preference allows you to change a whole class. In other frameworks, interception is known as AOP, Aspect-Oriented Programming. In Magento 2, customizations can be accomplished through events and plugins. Events are the implementation of a well-known development pattern, Event Observer. Events are covered in detail in the next module. Plugins allow you to customize a single method. This process is basically rewrites and events on a method level. Plugins offer the ability to create methods that execute before a target method, to modify the arguments passed to the target method. A plugin can also execute after the target method in order to modify the returned result. A plugin can be called before, after, or even instead of the target method. Plugins do not conflict with each other because they are executed sequentially. You must specify the following elements when declaring a plugin. Type name, a class, interface, or virtual type that the plugin observes. Plugin name, an arbitrary name that identifies the plugin, used to merge the configurations for the plugin. Plugin type, the name of a plugin class or its virtual type, uses the naming convention model name plugin. The following arguments are optional and should only be specified if needed. It is a best practice to omit these arguments by default. Plugin sort order, the order in which plugins that call the same method are run. Plugin disabled, set to true to disable a plugin. Here is an example of a plugin. The syntax is very simple. The way it works: you define a plugin, you create a class within another class, then inside that class you can define which methods write the plugin. If you need to change the arguments of an original method or add some behavior before the method is called, you should use the before listener method. A code example is presented on the slide.
If you need to change the values returned by an original method or add some behavior after an original method is called, you should use the after listener method. A code example is presented on the slide. Please note that after plugin has access to the arguments as well as before. Magento passes arguments after the result parameter, such that each argument will be represented by its parameter. Also note the example of accessing the username argument of the original login method.
If you need to change both the arguments and return values of an original method, or add some behavior before or after the method is called, you should use the around listener method. The around listener method will receive two parameters, subject and proceed, followed by the arguments belonging to an original method. The subject parameter will provide access to all public methods of the original class. The proceed parameter is a lambda that will call the next plugin or method. Any further method arguments will be passed to the around plugin methods after the subject and the proceed arguments. They have to be passed on to the next plugin method when calling proceed. A code example is presented on the slide. Use one or more of the following methods to extend, modify an original method's behavior with the interception functionality. Change the arguments of an original method through the before listener. Change the values returned by an original method through the after listener. Change both the arguments and returned values of an original method through the around listener. Override an original method, a conflicting change. Note: overriding a class is a conflicting change, meaning other extensions that declare a plugin for the same method might cease to function. Extending a class's behavior is a non-conflicting change. If several plugins apply to the same original method, the following sequence is observed. The before listener in a plugin with the highest priority, that is, with the smallest value of the sort order argument. The around listener in a plugin with the highest priority, that is, with the smallest value of the sort order argument. Other before listeners in plugins according to the sort order specified for them, that is, from the smallest to the greatest value. Other around listeners in plugins according to the sort order specified for them, that is, from the smallest to the greatest value. The after listener in a plugin with the lowest priority, that is, with the greatest value of sort order argument. Other after listeners in plugins in the reverse sort order specified for them, that is, from the greatest to the smallest value. Inheritance affects the order of the plugin loading. Each Magento 2 module has its own set of configuration files gathered into the module's etc directory. Depending on the needs of your module, you might have the following configuration files: acl.xml, config.xml, di.xml, module.xml, webapi.xml. Because of configuration inheritance, we can create a module, make it dependent from a core module using the sequence node in the module.xml and composer.json files, and redefine a preference for a certain interface using the di.xml. In this case, our preference will be taken into account, which will have a similar effect as a rewrite in Magento 1. Configuration files from modules loaded later can change values declared by configuration files loaded earlier. This is why specifying the sequence is important. Configuration inheritance involves some expensive operations in runtime. The compiler tool can be used to minimize the performance impact of these operations. Interception provides the ability to observe public method calls in an application, and is therefore used to reduce conflicts among extensions that change the behavior of the same class or method. Plugins can be created for any object in an application created through Object Manager. These plugins will observe method calls for that object and allow for adding behavior to these observed methods. Multiple extensions can add plugins to the same object independently without causing conflicts. These plugins are called sequentially based on configured sort order.
In this video, we will talk about plugins in Magento. So, plugin is a customization technique which is also used a lot in Magento core, which allows a developer to add some code before, after, or instead of a certain public method of the class. If the class is created via Object Manager, which is usually the case, we can customize it using plugin. In order to customize the class, we have to declare a plugin in the di.xml file, and the example of declaration you can see here in the catalog module. So we should specify a type node, specify name of the class, and then specify plugin and type of a plugin. And type of the plugin is a class, plugin class. There are 3 plugins possible: before, around, and after. Let's take a look into them. Around plugin is probably the most complex one. Around plugin looks like around and method. So the original class, customer group, would have save method, and we create a plugin by adding around to that. We will have parameter of the method and the result of the method, but we will also get a closure proceed. We may execute this proceed, which will execute original method. So we can do something before method, we can execute it and do something after the method. We may select not execute it at all and do something else instead. Other example is after plugin. After plugin would get original object and then its result and parameters of the object. It will be executed after the original method. So again, the original class would have public function get, and in order to pluginize it, we would create public function after get method, which would get first parameter would be original object, second parameter would be result, and the rest of parameters would be parameters of the original get method. So we can do something in the after plugin, and then we can return something. And whatever we return will be a return value of the original method. If we return nothing, original method will return null. This is a very important point and mistake of Magento beginners. Before plugin allows us to access original object and parameters and do something with those parameters. Plugins do not have to extend any class. So this is just a regular PHP class which would have before, after, or around methods.
This exercise is optional. See your course exercise guide for steps on how to complete this exercise and the solution.
See your course exercises guide for instructions on how to complete this exercise and the solution. Look at the file constructors in your Magento installation at Magento Framework View Layout, Magento Framework View Element, UI Component, Data Provider, Filter Pool. Note the following types of parameters there: classes, interfaces, factories, arrays, variables. Examining these constructors should raise some questions for you. See if you can answer any of the 3 questions on the next slide.
How does Magento define which instance of an interface should be delivered? When you check the file system, you notice there are almost no factory classes. So what, then, is delivered? You look at the filter pool class and notice it uses array elements in parameters. But it was created as a regular class by being included in other class controllers. So how does Magento define what should be in the array? These questions will be answered in the content that follows.